Are you going to play O Canada now, Evan?
I think I'll open the meeting first, Evan, and I'll just quickly do a quick welcome. Okay, we live?
We are live.
All right, thank you, Council Coordinator. Good afternoon and welcome to the special meeting of Council for Tuesday, December 22nd, 2020. To kick off the special meeting, I'll turn it over to the Council Coordinator, Mr. Evan McGinty, to lead us through O Canada.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. Carton bras et porter le pays, il sait porter la croix. Ton histoire est une épopée des plus brillants exploits. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. McGinty. Thank you for that. And we begin this gathering by acknowledging the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Acknowledging this reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resource and friendship of Indigenous peoples. So I'll look to the Deputy Clerk for the adoption of the agenda. And I know we just have a quick update on that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm here today. The deputy is not here today. However, the agenda was republished this morning to include documents provided by the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, being the Air Monitoring Survey Technical Memorandum regarding surface water study and presentation. These items were also circulated to Council yesterday via email, and that's the only change to the agenda as you see it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to the City Clerk. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda? Councillor Phillips, seconded by Councillor Harris. All in favor? Okay, that's carried. There is no mayor's report as this is a special meeting in terms of what's going on in the community. I encourage everybody to check out both the city's website and also the Niagara Region's website looking for information related to COVID-19. As the province has indicated, starting on Boxing Day, the province will move into a lockdown. More information can be found on both the public health website and on the city's website. In terms of impact on businesses, again, the economic development team at the City of St. Catharines has been issuing information as it has been made available related to the impacts on business, and they'll continue to do so over the holidays. For those who are looking to support businesses in our community, check out Love STC. And Love STC is a site that has all the different businesses for both pickup and curbside delivery. And that's a place in which we can go for looking to support local businesses. So I'll just leave it at that. We do have a special presentation today, hence why we're here. Due notice has been given. The notice was issued and has been made public as of December 17th. That is within the guidelines provided by the procedures of the City of St. Catharines. Information was received by the Ministry of the Environment yesterday. It has been posted on the city's website. Everything that has been taking place up until today has been open and transparent. Just want to make sure the public is aware of that. With that, I'm going to turn it over for just a quick update and opening up, if you will, of the discussion that we'll be heading into and setting some of the parameters. We have the Director of Planning, Ms. Kite.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor, and through you to council, the public, and everyone else who's joining us online today. As you will recall, back in January 2020, this council passed a resolution that included an action plan for the properties referred to as 282 and 285 Ontario Street. The city has created a website with that action plan, including all of the documentation that council has been updated on over the months. So there have been numerous updates to council in February, March, May, July, September, and now December of this year. One of those requests in the action plan were directed at the Ministry of Environment to assist in undertaking surface water testing of the 12 Mile Creek, as well as air particulate monitoring testing at upwind and downwind locations. There's been a series of testing done by the Ministry of Environment and Conservation and Parks, who will be giving you a presentation on that today. As the mayor has previously stated, this public meeting, this special meeting of council was advertised on December the 17th, and that information that has been provided by the Ministry of Environment has now been posted online. We are very appreciative that the ministry has been working with us in getting the results and the testing undertaken over the past year. Originally, we had planned to come together in January of the new year to present the findings, but the ministry was able to expedite their work and present today. So I'd like to introduce Kim Groombridge, manager with the Ministry of the Environment here at the downtown St. Catharines location, and Phil Hall is also on the line. They will be undertaking a presentation and we'll be happy to field your questions. After we get through today's presentation, City of St. Catharines staff will be digesting the information that's presented today and reporting back to council early in the new year with any recommendations as they pertain to the city's area of authority. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Kite. And just before we hand it over to the Ministry of the Environment and Ms. Groombridge, just a reminder that questions will be to the ministry only. Staff, any questions of staff will be then circulated into the staff reports. There will be no questions of staff today since they have just received the report as well. I repeat, there will be no questions of staff today as they had just received the report. This is strictly for the Ministry of the Environment. So if you have questions of the Ministry of Environment, that's what this meeting is for. And then once that is, we're through that, Councillor Cisco and Councillor Porter have a motion that we can move this forward with. Okay, I'll turn it over to Ms. Groombridge. Thank you very much on behalf of the City of St. Catharines for coming to us today, 3 short days of Christmas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that you have all accommodated this special council meeting. We're happy to be here to present our findings. It's been a significant amount of work and effort put into this survey, and we've drawn upon the expertise from our technical experts, our field technicians, our laboratory scientists in order to complete it. I do have 3 people, I believe, with me today. Phil Hall is the environmental officer for the City of St. Catharines. He's been doing a lot of work on this particular issue. Katie Potter is the Niagara District Supervisor, and Linda Gabriel is our coordinator, who's helped put this summary together for you today. I also, before I leap into it, want to thank the region of Niagara and Ontario Power Generation, and of course the City of St. Catharines for providing access for sampling where needed, assisting in establishing our air monitoring locations, and for providing some very helpful information about the municipal sewers in the area. If we could get the presentation up on screen, that would be helpful. Okay, great. We can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so as I mentioned, the purpose today is to present the results of our surface water and our air monitoring surveys that were conducted to assess any offsite impacts from the former GM property. So the agenda, it's pretty straightforward. We're going to give an overview of what our role is, particularly in respect to brownfield sites. A little bit of a site background overview. We'll go over the surface water monitoring results and the air survey results. And we've provided these results to the public health unit, and they've given us some feedback to include for you as well today. Next slide, please. So the ministry's role is to respond to complaints and reports of pollution incidents and assess potential impacts to human health or the natural environment. Where there's evidence that indicates there are offsite impacts, we have a toolbox full of ways to require a property owner to take action, and we have the authority to do that. It has to be based on evidence. In respect to brownfields, we review submissions related to brownfield risk assessments and or records of site condition, and we ensure that the owners and responsible parties of contaminated sites in Ontario follow the rules to ensure protection of human health and the environment. I was asked to give a bit of an overview of the brownfield development process, so here's a high level. Brownfield remediations are proponent driven. If a property owner wishes to convert a property, in this case an industrial property, to a more sensitive land use, such as residential, then the property owner must file a record of site condition with the ministry prior to proceeding with the change. Filing a record of site condition ensures that any potential on-site risks to human health or the environment are identified and appropriately addressed before the land use change. And in order to file a record of site condition, a proponent may either clean up the site to ministry standards, or they can conduct a risk assessment and recommend risk management measures to protect human health and the environment. Next slide, please. So just a bit of background, you may or may not know that General Motors began operations at this particular site in 1929, and the site closed in 2010. There are on-site oil grit separators that are used to collect and treat stormwater from both sides of the property, both sides of Ontario Street. The west side separator discharges directly into 12 Mile Creek, and the east side oil grit separator discharges to a municipal sewer that then ultimately discharges upstream of the property, again to 12 Mile Creek. There are also discharges that are purely municipal. These municipal discharges collect from stormwater from catch basins and sewers from roadways in the residential areas and residential properties. And these go, again, directly into 12 Mile Creek. When the facility was in operation, the ministry had GM on our regular proactive inspection program. We would inspect things like their former PCB storage site. We would assess their hazardous waste management practices and determine whether or not they're following the requirements for their air emissions. The site was purchased in 2014 by Bayshore Group for brownfield redevelopment. Prior to any of the demolition activities that were initiated, the PCB storage site was decommissioned and the hazardous and liquid industrial waste on the property were removed. So during the initial demolition phase, the ministry received 5 complaints between 2015 and 2017, and they were mainly related to dust concerns. And the ministry did require the company to implement dust management measures at the time. And they seemed to be effective, as the next time we heard anything about the site was in January 2020, when the city reached out to us as the community had been raising concerns about offsite dust impacts and runoff from the site, and they requested our assistance to help assess those. Next slide, please. So first, I'll go through the surface water monitoring survey. We've been out on 5 separate occasions. The first 3 events are included in the reports that have been provided. The subsequent 2 will be provided in an addendum, and these are mainly focused on that upstream location that I mentioned, the east oil grit separator. We recently found out discharges to the municipal sewer and flows to a discharge point that's upstream of the property. When those results are available, like I said, an addendum will be provided. So the parameters that are listed there were selected based on a review of environmental assessment reports that we have for the property. So general chemistry, metals, volatile organic compounds, acid-base neutrals, also known as semi-volatiles, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, commonly known as PAHs, and polychlorinated biphenyls, commonly known as PCBs, were all monitored. These parameters were compared against several benchmarks. They include the provincial water quality objectives, which represent a desirable level of water quality that the MECP strives to maintain in surface waters of the province. It's a very conservative level that's protective of all forms of aquatic life. It is not a legislated requirement to meet those. The Canadian quality objectives are, sorry, somebody's trying to call me. There we go. The Canadian water quality objectives can be used to complement the provincial water quality objectives and are helpful when assessing water quality where sometimes PWQOs do not exist for a particular parameter. And there are some Canadian water quality guidelines that are more recent and more current than provincial water quality objectives. So they've also been included in the assessment. Typical urban stormwater quality and dry weather water quality is also an important benchmark to use. So it gives you an idea of what will be commonly found in urban areas. Typical urban stormwater quality has been established in the ministry's stormwater manual and in scientific literature. And it provides expected ranges for common contaminants that you find in urban stormwater discharges. What we also were lucky in this circumstance have to be able to compare to is quite a bit of local data that was collected in the early 2000s during a track down study that was conducted in 12 Mile Creek. So it gives us some expected contaminant ranges that's very local. So the parameters that are in bold font are the parameters that we found exceedances of one or more of these benchmarks. And they consist of the metals, the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and the polychlorinated biphenyls or PCBs. And these are the three parameters that we're going to focus on in the rest of the presentation. Next slide, please. Sorry. So I'm just going to give an overview of exactly how provincial water quality objectives are set to help you understand. As I mentioned, they're very conservative numbers. In order to set them, a review of the global aquatic toxicological literature is undertaken. This helps to determine what range of concentrations can be expected to see effects. And there are various effects that are assessed, including toxicity and bioaccumulation, even mutagenicity and odor. So once all of these effects are reviewed, the lowest effect level of any of those effects is selected. So for instance, if effects are found to occur between 10 and 100 micrograms per liter, we would select the lowest effect, or 10 micrograms per liter, and call that the lowest effect level. Then we add in a safety factor on top of that. So the lowest effect level of 10 micrograms per liter would be divided by a safety factor of 10, which would then result in a provincial water quality objective of 1 microgram per liter. It's important to note that these PWQOs are not set considering what laboratories can detect. And in fact, sometimes the PWQO is lower than what can practically be detected in a laboratory. Next slide, please. So just a bit about urban stormwater quality to give you some context. We expect to find certain contaminants in urban stormwater, such as metals and PAHs. This is mainly due to vehicle traffic. It accounts for much of the buildup of contaminants that are found on road surfaces. If you think about it, it's obvious: tire wear, brake pad wear, engine oil and lubricant drippings, and corrosion of metals on vehicles has to go somewhere, and it does accumulate on road surfaces. Our asphalt pavement deteriorates over time and contributes to contamination. Road and driveway maintenance activities such as salting or driveway sealants also contribute. Of course, industrial and commercial activities such as unloading and loading areas and vehicle storage and maintenance. And air pollution fallout from vehicle emissions, as well as industrial sources, or even just wind erosion, all contribute to urban stormwater quality. And what I want you to take away from this slide is in this area that we're talking about, it's an older urban area, and the infrastructure, as we know, was put in years ago, and it's really catch basins and sewers installed to control flooding. There's no treatment of stormwater before discharging to 12 Mile Creek. So as a result, contaminants are expected to exceed the provincial water quality objectives in this type of urban stormwater. Next slide, please. So here's a map of the surface water locations that we sampled at. All of these sample locations are on OPG's private property with restricted access, and we coordinated with OPG to let us in to conduct our sampling events. 3 of these locations are direct discharges to 12 Mile Creek, and the balance of them were measured actually in the creek, sampled right from the creek water. So one of the discharges, the one furthest to the north, is the what we call the City West outfall. This is the municipal stormwater that I mentioned that collects the roadway and residential property stormwater runoff and discharges to the creek. Just to the south of that, we call the GM West outfall. It's actually the former GM site, and this is the oil grit separator from the West plant, and it discharges directly into the creek. And then the last discharge is what I'd mentioned as well. It's also a city municipal outfall, but it is what receives the East plant oil grit separator, and it's located furthest to the south there, south of the actual property. Next slide, please. So I'll start with an overview of the metal sampling results. In the municipal storm sewer from the roadways, there were 6 metals that exceeded the provincial water quality objective in the snow melt event, and 2 metals that exceeded during the rain event. When we compare these metal concentrations to typical urban stormwater quality, there is no difference. It is considered what you would expect to see coming off of an urban area like the Ontario Street area. For the GM West outfall, there were 2 metals that exceeded the provincial water quality objective during the snow melt. 2 different metals that exceeded in the rain event. It's important to note that there was no ongoing discharge during dry weather, confirming that this oil grit separator is currently only operating during stormwater events. And in all cases, the metals were either not a surface water concern or were lower than what is considered typical urban stormwater quality during our survey. In the 12 Mile Creek itself, both the upstream and downstream locations had only 1 metal that exceeded provincial water quality objectives, and that is aluminum. And that is not a concern. Aluminum levels are naturally elevated around here. It's a component of the clay in our area, and it's just due to the geological features. So all other metals were below provincial water quality objectives and are not a surface water concern. There was no metal impacts to the creek. Next slide, please. So this is a visual of those 4 metals that I mentioned that came out of the oil grit separator from the GM property, which is what we were asked to assess. But what I've got on screen here, the brown bars are the GM West outfall. The green bars is the comparison to the municipal stormwater discharge, and that light blue bar is what is considered typical urban stormwater, just to give you a visual comparative. So for iron, during the snow melt, there was a marginal provincial water quality objective exceedance, but it was well below, as you can see, what you would consider in typical urban stormwater. For the cadmium result, there was only a marginal exceedance of the provincial water quality objective in the GM West outfall during the snow melt event, but again, well below what you would expect to see in typical urban stormwater. For copper, there was a small exceedance during the wet event for the GM West outfall, and there were exceedances in the municipal sewer, both during the snow melt and the wet event. But again, both of them were well below typical urban stormwater concentrations. And the last metal, chromium, Again, for the GM outfall, there was a marginal exceedance during the rain event or the wet event, and exceedances in both the snowmelt and the wet event for the municipal discharge. But all of those were within what would be expected in a typical urban stormwater discharge. Next slide, please. So now we'll talk about the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs. There were only exceedances found in the city storm sewer. If you don't know, PAHs are chemicals that occur naturally in coal and crude oil and gasoline. And they're also produced during combustion, or when coal, oil, gas, or even tobacco are burned. There's many urban sources of PAHs. I mentioned these earlier. They come from vehicles and asphalt and oil drippings and tire wear. Like I said, the city storm sewer did have several PAH PWQO exceedances that were expected. They're all listed at the bottom of this slide. And they were all values that are typically seen in urban stormwater roadway runoff. For the GM West outfall, the discharge PAH concentrations were below provincial water quality objectives, or in one case, there's an updated Canadian water quality guideline for all of the sample events and are not a concern for surface water. And in 12 Mile Creek, once again, both upstream and downstream were all below the provincial water quality objectives for PAHs, so there was no impact indicated. Next slide, please. So my photo is not showing up here, but the polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs, as they're more commonly known as, were used as coolants and lubricants in electrical equipment and were widely used in industrial materials such as caulking, paint, sealants, and gasket materials, and even carbonless copy paper, a local one that was produced in Thorold once upon a time. And although banned in 1977, because of its persistence and widespread use, PCBs are found in waterways throughout the country and certainly throughout the province. Now, PCBs bioaccumulate in aquatic organisms. That is the concern with them. So to minimize exposure to PCBs in the environment, the Ministry's Guide to Eating Ontario Fish provides consumption advice for people who eat fish from our waterways. And that advice is based on guidelines provided by Health Canada. So I've provided the link there. You're welcome to explore that. The fish guide is now completely electronic. And what you'll find is that there are consumption advisories for PCBs in pretty much all of the waterways in the Niagara region. Next slide, please. So I mentioned this project trackdown that occurred back in the early 2000s. Ministry worked with Environment Canada to study 5 Ontario watersheds that also included 12 Mile Creek, which is fortunate for us. And the goal was to identify locally controllable sources of PCBs and to differentiate potential source areas of PCBs from the background conditions that exist just from the widespread use before they were banned. So this background condition, it's not natural conditions, but it reflects sort of typical concentrations that you would expect in urban areas that don't have a known source of PCBs. So this work has been ongoing since about 2000. The trackdown here in Niagara resulted in 4 very large remedial projects for significant sources of PCBs that were found in contaminated sediments in the upper reaches of the 12 Mile Creek watershed. There's still work ongoing along the Old Welland Canal to address PCB sources that were identified during this trackdown from historic landfills. These are all upstream of the GM property. And again, fortunate for us, the former GM site, West Oil Grit Separator discharge, was included in this 12 mile trackdown. It was found to contain PCBs in the typical urban stormwater concentration range. But again, fortunate for us, because the development that is occurring at that property, existing stormwater control measures on that site are required to be updated. And part of that updating will include controlling these sources of PCBs in the discharge. Next slide, please. So again, just another visual of the data that was collected as part of this study. Most of this data is from 2003 on the slide. The study found that the background concentrations of PCBs could get up to 22 nanograms per liter during rain events. This is expected as PCBs bind very strongly to solids, and those solids can get mixed into rainwater and stormwater and washed into our waterways. The study established that surface water PCB threshold at greater than 10 nanograms per liter, which is 10 times the provincial water quality objective, and approximately the average of all of the wet study events as part of the track down. So anything above 10 nanograms per liter warranted further examination using other lines of evidence, which included things like bioaccumulation potential and sediment testing where possible. So if you look in that first area on the graph, that's labeled Beaver Dams Creek and Lake Gibson area, these are the pre-cleanup values. You can see they were quite high. This is where the 4 large remedial projects have occurred since then, and there's been a very good success in improving the environment in that area. In the next section, in the Old Welland Canal area, again, there are high levels and some, over the threshold, but not quite as high, identified. And these were led back to a couple of historic landfills in the area, and remedial work plans are in progress to address those. For the 12-mile creek proper, like I said earlier, the GM West outfall was the discharge that was monitored as part of this study. 3 wet and 3 dry events gave an average of the value that you see on your screen there. It's within the background range of concentrations that you would see in urban stormwater and marginally above the threshold. I guess what's important to note is that despite the changes to the site, the operation not, the GM operation not being there anymore, and the demolition activities that have occurred, that light blue bar is very similar to the 2003 monitoring. So there has not been changes to what is being seen in the discharge to 12-Mile Creek. Back in the 2000s, because it was over the threshold, we did look at the other lines of evidence, and we could not establish that there was anything different than what is considered background in order to require additional work at the time. But whenever there's an opportunity to control PCBs, it's warranted that work be done. And Bayshore has been instructed previous to any of this to update their stormwater controls on the site, and certainly controlling the source of PCBs in their stormwater will be part of this work. Next slide, please. So moving on to the air monitoring survey. The survey was designed to address the residents' concerns about potential dust impacts. So there were 2 high volume particulate monitors to measure suspended particulate or dust installed in the vicinity of the GM plant. So these monitors draw a known volume of air through a filter for a 24-hour period in order to quantify the amount of dust in the air. So in addition to just monitoring suspended particulate, which has its own limits, metals were also monitored as a potential contaminant or component in the dust based on the past operations and the demolition activities. In addition to the high volume monitors, we also put in dustfall samplers, and these are a monthly assessment, and what they do is determine the amount of particles that are in the air that actually settle over a given area under the influence of gravity. So in addition to those 2 samples, or sorry, for both of those 2 types of samples, microscopic particle identification was conducted to determine what the composition of the dust was. And any samples that had microscopic fibers identified were submitted for asbestos analysis to an external lab. Next slide, please. So you can see there were 10 monitoring events that were conducted. The way the high vol samples were collected to ensure that we're getting the best indication of whether or not there's an impact from the property. The dates were selected based on forecasted wind direction. And this ensured that the two high volume samplers were upwind and downwind of the property under the worst case conditions. So a northwest wind is what was desired, and in most cases there was northwest wind during the sample period. I already mentioned the parameters tested, and what we compared them to were our Ontario Regulation 419, which is our air pollution for local air quality regulation. It sets legal limits for what air quality should be. It's also compared to ambient air quality criteria, which is the concentration of a contaminant in air that is protective against adverse effects on health. And the samples with microscopic synthetic fibers were also tested for asbestos. And this was a presence absence test and conducted by a third-party lab that's accredited for this procedure. Next slide, please. So here's a visual of the setup of the design of our air survey. The 3 monitoring locations are numbered 27094, which was a regional pumping station that is meant to be our upwind station. 27097 is the downwind location located at the Hague Bowl Arena. And station 27096 was our dust fall jar location, which is in the northeast portion just off property of the site. We also installed a meteorological station at the arena, and it provided the data for the wind direction. The data is presented here. It's called a wind rose, and it's those colored bars in the center of your screen there, right by the arena. What it shows there, what wind roses are used to show, is the observed wind speeds and wind directions. So on this particular date, which was the 24-hour period starting October 7th, we had wind speeds up to between 12 and 20 kilometers per hour. The direction of the longest spoke of the wind rose shows the wind direction with the greatest frequency. So you can see that these spokes are coming from the northwest direction, again, which was the desired wind direction in order for the survey to be effective. Next slide, please. So it's the same survey layout here, but what this one shows is the monthly wind rose, and it demonstrates the importance of the dust fall jar. So the wind rose here for the period of October, it shows that the wind direction is predominantly from the southwest, which is expected for our area. We had wind gusts over 20 kilometers per hour. And the wind direction you can see is for the majority of the month is blowing directly towards our dust fall jar. Next slide, please. So this is a very busy slide that I'm not going to read individually, but the main message is there in green. All of the results that were measured are below our air standards and the ambient air quality criteria. If you go to the next slide, I'll get into more detail. So like I said, the standards and the ambient air quality criteria for both suspended particulate matter and metals were below. Our measurements were below those criteria. The maximum 24-hour concentration of suspended particulate was 60 micrograms per meter cubed, which is well below our standard of 120. There were 3 dates where we very effectively captured predominantly northwest wind direction. And the significance of this is that both the stations upwind and downwind of the property were very similar when it came to suspended particulate emissions, which demonstrates that off-site impacts from the GM property were not observed. For the results of the microscopic analysis of the high-vol samples mainly contained road dust particles, biological materials, some trace synthetic fibers, tire wear particles, and trace metal fragments. And 7 of the high-vol samples where we found the trace synthetic fibers were sent for the asbestos analysis. And the good news is there was no asbestos found in any of the samples submitted. Next slide, please. So the dust fall monitoring results were compared against ambient air quality criteria. It is a 30-day measurement. So there were 3 samples collected over the survey period for August, September, and October. The criteria is a 7 grams per meter squared per 30 days. And again, as I said, that's basically the settleable particulate over that period. And the maximum that was measured was only 3, much less than the criteria itself. The composition of the dust fall that was captured in the jar was mainly biological material like insects, some plant material, and minerals that you would find in road dust. Next slide, please. So here's a summary of both the water and the air surveys and the outcomes. For the surface water, there was no impacts to 12 Mile Creek water quality observed at all during the survey. Stormwater entering 12 Mile Creek is considered typical of urban stormwater quality. There were no ongoing dry weather discharges occurring from the GM property to the creek. The oil grit separators on the former GM property will be updated as part of the development activities. And a good outcome that was not expected on one of the days that we were out there sampling, we found sanitary sewage discharging from the municipal outfall. When we reported that to the city, they acted very quickly to find a blockage in the sewer and ended that discharge. So that was an unexpected good outcome. For the air monitoring surveys, all of the samples mainly contained normal road dust. High volume air samples were below ministry standards and ambient air quality criteria. There were no asbestos particles found in any of the air samples. Monthly dust fall was found to be below the ambient air quality criteria, and suspended particulate was similar in the samples upwind of the property to those measured downwind, suggesting that there was no fugitive dust emissions from the property. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we submitted those reports to our regional public health friends who are very busy these days, as you can imagine. They recognize that environmental contaminants can take many years to manifest as health outcomes. And the analysis of contaminants that are already present and being released into the environment on an ongoing basis are an important predictor if adverse health may result in the future. So the feedback they gave us was that they had not detected any unusual health outcomes in the vicinity of the GM plant. Based on the thorough sampling and analysis conducted by my ministry, the water in the vicinity of the GM plant appears to be better in terms of harmful contaminants than is typically seen in urban areas. And likewise, the air quality shows contaminants well below standards that are meant to protect human health. Based on this evidence, public health believes there's no increased risk of adverse health to persons living in the vicinity of the former GM plant. And public health is supportive of the mitigative measures that are recommended by my ministry. And that's in respect to the update to the oil grit separators on the GM site to further protect local residents from environmental contaminants. So if we go to the next slide, we're at the point where I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Groombridge, for a very thorough presentation. A lot of information has been included in there, and I just want to start by saying thank you to you and your team for the work that you've done over the last year plus in putting the information into something that's understandable for us here today. And also, I do want to extend again to St. Catharines MPP Jenny Stevens, who's been working very closely with Minister Yurik's office to ensure that this gets moved forward as quickly as possible. So there's a lot of really good, positive information in here, Ms. Groombridge, and I would like to say thank you on behalf of council for all of your efforts. So I've got a bit of a speaker list, and again, just remind the councillors that the questions are for the presenter, and I'll start with Councillor Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to District Manager Groombridge. Just on slide 4, it says that General Motors began operations on the Ontario Street site in 1929. I just wanted to point out that McKinnon's Industries had started working there on in 1900, as a matter of fact. So just wanted to point that out. There's a bit of a longer industrial history on that site than the slide indicates, but that's not critically important. Also on slide 4, it indicates that PCBs and hazardous and liquid industrial waste were removed from the site by the current owner. What evidence do we have to support the fact that that these materials or these liquids were removed from the site?
Well, my ministry through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. My ministry conducted inspections prior to and just subsequent to the closing of the GM plant. We oversaw the PCB site decommissioning by reviewing the submission of the decommissioning documents, and the hazardous waste and liquid industrial waste management process is again something that is regulated by my ministry and was monitored as a result of this plant closing.
And has your ministry seen other environmental studies that indicate to hazardous waste, subsurface hazardous waste on the site?
Hazardous waste is defined as waste that is as waste. Sorry, your question is asking.
Well, sorry, yeah, contaminant or any kind of dangerous materials, heavy metals, PCBs, etc.
Yeah, so we do have environmental assessment reports for the property as expected. It's a brownfield property and there are contaminants present there. But our review indicates that there's no immediate offsite concern. And those contaminants are the responsibility of the owner who is developing the property to ensure that they're properly addressed before proceeding with any land use changes.
Thank you. And is there any other contaminants, or I'm not sure of the precise wording, or any other materials, substances that we should be concerned about that the report doesn't address, or have you covered the most significant and ones that could potentially cause health issues?
Again, the survey was designed by our technical specialists who used the environmental assessments as the baseline to determine which contaminants were appropriate to monitor. Any contaminants that remain on the site, again, will have to be dealt with during the development of the property. But we're fairly certain that what we have assessed is a good representation of what might pose a risk. And it's the offsite risk, again, that is our role to ensure that there's no impacts.
Thank you. And would you be willing to have some questions from the public about this report at a future meeting in the new year?
The public's welcome to submit any questions to us at any time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Williamson. Councillor Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to Ms. Groombridge for an excellent presentation. So I have a couple of questions. The first one, I don't know if she is able to answer this or not, but she does say in the presentation that if the owner wishes to change the use, there must be a record of site condition before that can be changed. Yet we recently changed the use of that, council did. Did we need approval of the ministry in order to make that change?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. That is an excellent question and a common misinterpretation. So the land use itself, the practical use, has not changed. It is still industrial. The planning use is distinct from what our ministry considers a land use change. So before there can be any more sensitive practical use on the property, it has to obtain, the owner has to obtain a record of site condition first.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
And then there were two areas, two specific instructions that you listed that Bayshore as a current owner, number one, that they have been instructed to update the stormwater controls on site. Has that been done?
No, as far as I know, that the answer is no to that, but the instructions were as part of the development, the stormwater controls on site have to be updated. And that instruction was given to them years ago when we originally inspected prior to the demolition.
So in other words, that is prior to any development, whether it be Bayshore or a future owner?
That's correct.
Okay. And the other one that you mentioned was the about the oil grit separators. Also the same situation, that they would have to be upgraded or improved before any development?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, that's it's essentially the same thing. The oil grit separators are there to manage the stormwater control, and it's those stormwater controls that need to be updated going forward.
Thank you. And the last question, just a general question. If I read your summary and your last slide with public health, is the ministry's opinion based on all the analysis and the input from public health that they do not see any health risk from this property at this time to any of the neighboring properties?
That's right. Our surveys have not identified any risks or health risks off-site of the property.
Sorry, I said the last question, but a corollary to that. Is it unusual that you did not find any water or air contaminants leaking or moving from the site when it has such a history of industrial use?
I'm not sure how to answer that question. We just go by the facts of what we assess.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garcia. Councillor Townsend, because I know you have to step off.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Ms. Groombridge. In your report, it suggests that there's no asbestos currently on property. Did I understand that correctly?
What we know, through you, Mr. Mayor, my excuse to the councillor, what we know, and again, my ministry does not regulate the removal of asbestos, but what we have confirmed with the Ministry of Labor is that there were asbestos removal activities prior to the demolition.
Prior to the demolition, there was, but in the, I guess I'm confused. So, because in the report that that the presentation we just saw, it said that there was no concern for asbestos in the building.
It's about the air quality.
That's right.
For the air quality. Okay, so the reason I'm asking this because I know we do have there are political groups here within St. Catharines presenting this concept of the dangers of asbestos in the air, but it doesn't seem like this is of concern at this point from the Ministry of Labor and the Ministry of Environment. So the reason I'm asking this question is to set the record straight so that people aren't being pumped with fake news and misinformation. So is it fair to suggest that right now there is no cause for alarm with issues relating specifically to asbestos?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, yes, that would be my assessment. Again, the best way to determine whether or not there is a risk is to assess whether or not there is asbestos suspended in the air, and that is what our survey has demonstrated is not occurring.
Okay, and I appreciate that because again, there is a lot of misinformation out there, and I think it's important to provide the real facts here to the public. So thank you, and I appreciate the presentation.
Thank you.
Councillor Townsend, followed by Councillor Dodge. Gotta unmute, Councillor. There you go.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry, I was having a little bit of trouble getting it to unmute for me. I just have a couple of questions through you, Mr. Mayor, to the presenter. So the RCS to date has not been requested or done. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, as far as I know, that is correct. In order to submit a record of site condition, there has to actually be either a risk assessment or a cleanup of the property to ministry standards.
Okay. And through your presentation, you were saying that during the operations of General Motors, you monitored, I guess, on a regular basis. Do you still monitor it? Or is it just on a complaint basis that anybody goes out to have any look at the site?
Our role is essentially to respond to complaints. Because of the heightened interest in this property, it is assessed regularly when the officer is in the area.
So can you just give me a rough idea maybe of how, like, what do you consider regularly?
Well, our officer, Philip Hall, is the officer for the city of St. Catharines, and he's by there. Yeah, to give you a number, I couldn't give you a number, but on a very regular basis, because this is his municipality that he's responsible for doing his work in. Okay, and then on slide 14, when you were talking about Bayshore having to update their stormwater system, have you given them like a time frame that they have to have that done by? The answer is no. What we have asked is, while the property is being developed, that the updates to the stormwater system occur. And the reason for that is unless they know how they're going to develop the property, it's difficult to design an appropriate stormwater system. So it has to go in conjunction with the development. Okay. And then I think you might have already answered this, but there's no discharging into the creek now whatsoever, even if there's like a high flow season or anything like that, when we have like a lot of rain? No, there's still stormwater. If there's a lot of rain, it flows through the oil grit separators. So there is some treatment and then it does get discharged. But during dry periods, there is no ongoing discharge to the creek. So when we would have a high flow and there could be discharge, would there be someone there to monitor what's being discharged into the system? It is not a requirement of this oil grit separator, nor of many, to have an ongoing monitoring. Okay, and then the last question I have is about the asbestos. I believe you said that you guys you don't do anything with it. So during the removal and the cleanup of that, who would be kind of overseeing that part of it? Well, again, my ministry doesn't regulate that, but my understanding is that the Ministry of Labor is the regulatory agency. And what they do is ensure that there are licensed contractors who are approved for that type of work overseeing it. Okay, so I guess just a follow-up or summary, is there an opportunity that you could perhaps provide us with contact information on who would be the one that would be contacted for that? And if people have, concerns with that they could contact as well? I can certainly do that. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's all my questions for now.
Thank you, Councillor Dodge, and we'll go to Councillor Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the presenter. There's no, is there a requirement for water quality, for testing asbestos for water quality? I went to Health Canada's website and checked out Canadian water quality guidelines for asbestos, and I'm not finding there is a national guideline for drinking water. Does the Ministry of the Environment ever test asbestos in water?
I don't believe so. Through you, Mr. Mayor, my apologies. I don't believe that's the case. Asbestos is a risk when it's airborne and inhaled. It is not a risk if it's in water.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a question related to records of site condition. There are documents floating around from testing done on the site by an environmental company. And I believe those were done because the property owner had the intention of filing a record of site condition at some point. So it was sort of documents that were in process by an external company. When a property owner does this kind of testing and then takes it to the Ministry of Environment, what happens to it? Do these documents become public?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, anything that is submitted to the ministry is subject to freedom of information. Typically, environmental assessments conducted by private property owners are not submitted to the ministry unless we ask for them. until such point as they've either conducted their risk assessment that they want the ministry to review, or if they're submitting a record of site condition based on a full site cleanup.
So assuming that property owner, the property owner at GM or the former GM lands wanted to redevelop this site, they would have to do a new risk assessment with testing. And if they wanted to develop it and use it as a more sensitive land use, that would get filed with the Ministry of the Environment, and it would be searchable, because some of the other developments in the city that we've approved that were former brownfields, you can find those reports. So could we expect that the public would be able to see in the future, if a development goes forward, that this information would be filed somewhere on the ministry's website?
Yeah, that's a very good question. When a record of site condition is filed, there is a public registry where those documents can be searched. That's correct.
Okay. Thank you very much. You talked about some of the other sources of PCBs in St. Catharines and further upstream, probably from the city of Thorold, and that there's been an remedial work plans for those sites. Who is responsible for monitoring the work plans for those? Who's doing the work and who's monitoring that to ensure that there is continuous improvement in terms of PCB levels?
So the ongoing work is being conducted by the city of St. Catharines. And my office is working with the folks at the city to ensure that the progress stays on track.
Okay, thank you very much. Does the Ministry of the Environment, like for brownfields, do they ever do ground testing around a brownfield? You've done surface water and air quality testing. Does the Ministry of the Environment also do like drill down around brownfields when warranted? When would you do something like that? And if so, when would you do it?
That would be a very rare circumstance that requires very specialized equipment. However, if there is an indication that that work is required, then we would use our authority to require the property owner to undertake that work.
Okay, thank you very much. And I don't think I have any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. Councillor Miller, you're up.
Thank you, through the mayor, to the presenter. Thanks for the presentation. It was very informative, and thanks for taking the time. I appreciate the comments on asbestos already, so I'll leave my questions about that. I think that's been sort of the biggest alarm bell that's been raised on a number of occasions locally. So certainly, so far, good news there. Just a couple other questions. On slide 3, and in your presentation, you sort of alluded to tools in the toolbox of the ministry if a proponent or a property owner is found. Obviously, it's not the case right now, which is great to reiterate, but what are some of those tools that we might see if they are found to be allowing things offsite?
Sure, great question. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. We have the ability, first of all, we have a public-facing compliance policy that's available on our website. In that compliance policy identifies our ability to use both voluntary and mandatory abatement tools. So voluntary is when we have somebody who is willing to work with us and willing to undertake the right actions. If we encounter folks that do not want to undertake those actions, then we move to our mandatory tools. They include provincial officers' orders, directors' orders, and there are extensions of those as well that can be used.
Okay, thanks. And just through the mayor, the ministry, I mean, what overall, I guess if you could encapsulate, I know you touched on this a bit, but what's the ministry's real interest in sites like these? Like what does the ministry ideally want to see happen on these sites?
Again, our role is to ensure that owners of these properties follow the rules to ensure protection of the environment and human health. Certainly development of a brownfield property to a more beneficial use would be in our interest, but our role is to ensure that that all of the rules, the legislation, and the standards are followed in that process.
Okay. And just obviously, a lot of the responsibility on the site, if not all of it, falls to the owner of the site. The former owner, you alluded to GM operated on this land for almost 100 years. Do they have any ongoing responsibility when it comes to the site? You know, obviously, if there were and if there are concerns and contaminants on the site, they're likely to be from when it was an industrial site. So do they have ongoing responsibility there?
The short answer is yes. We have the ability to reach back to prior owners to require actions be taken. Typically, we deal with the current owner first to see if we can get the change that or compliance that we require completed. But yes, we do have the ability to reach back to prior owners. Okay.
And have they been a party to any of this, any of the testing? I mean, do you have to notify GM, or they would be notified if there was an issue that really came up?
In fact, we've been in regular conversations with General Motors, and they've been very helpful in providing information for us in the design of this survey and answering questions we have about the site.
Okay, because yeah, I think they've been maybe left out a little bit of the community conversation just in terms of their response. So it's good to hear that they are staying involved and more importantly are still liable in some way or another if there are issues. I guess my last question is, I don't know, I'm not going to presume how much you know specific about the site and our involvement, but the city, suffice to say, the city has taken on a lot of responsibility on this site, especially over the course of last year. I'm just wondering if either specific to the site, if you're able to, or generally speaking, what are the best practices for a city in terms of actions, policies, for private sites like this? Obviously, we have a role, as you already alluded to. We know planning, we have a role there, and everything else. But is there more we could be doing in terms of ensuring the health and safety of the community around this site?
That question's a little bit out of my scope. I do know that the city has property standards that you are enforcing. Again, we've been working closely with the city through all of this. So yeah, for me to provide advice, I think it's a little bit out of my scope, but I do feel that the city has been using the tools that it has as well to enact a good outcome here.
Okay, perfectly fair. Sorry to put you on the spot like that. And
it's okay.
That's okay, Mr. Mayor. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. And Councillor Kushner, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is quite similar to the last one. The city didn't contact you, I gather, until February 13th, 2020. And yet in 2015, you started having complaints from residents. So I gather not that much had been done until the city contacted you. Would that be a fair assessment?
I'm not sure of the question. We had 5 complaints in a period of 2 years about dust, and we took actions to require dust mitigation. The next we heard was in actually January, because the city staff contacted us first, and we were already working with them before the formal request came. And that's brought us to the work we've done today.
Okay, so what is the lesson to be learned by the city? In the case we have future properties being complained about, should the city get involved at an earlier stage or not?
I think every case is site specific. And certainly, again, I have a very great rapport with the staff at the city, and they can reach out to my office at any time if there are questions of that nature for other sites.
Yes, thank you. Your report should be very reassuring to the neighborhood. It's certainly a good news item that there are no off-site negative impacts. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kushner. In terms of the last question, I think it's important to note that there was significant demolition that had taken place between 2015 and I believe probably 2018 When you look at the property today, about 80% of the buildings have been removed. So I think Councillor Kushner, to answer your question, why maybe wasn't the city involved? The city actually was involved, and it was in through the former chief of building and inspection, Sandy Burrows, who was following this very closely, who would have been the one issuing the demolition permits, but also having staff and the MOE and the Ministry of Labor who would have been watching and monitoring the demolition as it took place. So it wasn't like the city wasn't doing anything from 2015 to 2019. It was a fact that work was actually being undertaken at the time that was being monitored by multiple levels of government. So I just want the public who's watching this to understand that it wasn't an empty property for 3 years or 4 years. Work was actually taking place that was being monitored by the levels of government that have been charged with the monitoring of this kind of serious and significant brownfield redevelopment, in taking it from an industrial property to something different. The question now goes to Councillor Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. On a go-forward basis, there's still, as the mayor mentioned, 80% of the property has been demolished, but there's still quite a bit to be done. When a buyer is found, hopefully that'll be soon, and demolition continues, will your ministry be monitoring air quality control during that demolition to ensure that there isn't any intrusive particles going through the air at that time?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. Typically, it is the demolition permits that have requirements for dust mitigation and controls. If those requirements are not being followed and there's an indication of offsite impacts, that's when the ministry's role kicks in. In this particular instance, although our high volume analyzers have been removed from the property, we have left our dust fall jar in place. So if there's any concerns about whether or not there are impacts occurring, we can conduct that monitoring very simply going forward. But again, the actual dust mitigation requirements are typically within building demolition permits. And if for whatever reason offsite impacts are occurring, that's usually when the ministry has a role to come in and to take some action.
Would the city be responsible for levying that concern to you so that you would come back, or who would indicate to you that there's a concern?
Well, the public has no problem calling us.
No.
So we receive calls on a regular basis, and like I said, we have officers assigned to the various municipalities, and they would be responding to assess those complaints. In this circumstance, aside from when the initial demolition occurred and prior to dust mitigation measures being put in place, it wasn't so much that we were identifying impacts offsite as opposed to concerns that there might be impacts. So again, we're involved to assist the city. We're happy to do that, but it is a little bit outside of our normal role currently.
Okay, and to follow up on Councillor Miller's question about General Motors' responsibility, when boreholes are dug on site and contaminants are found, and if they are significant, does General Motors have responsibility, or is it buyer beware? The new buyer is totally responsible for remediation.
Yeah, it really depends on what's found and the circumstances around it. As I mentioned, we do have the ability to reach back to past owners depending on those circumstances, and it's something that we reserve for when the current owner is not undertaking the activities, because they also have responsibility. It's just, like I said, another tool in our toolbox to ensure protection of the environment.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Great report.
Thank you.
Councillor Phillips, and Councillor Sorrento, looks like you're the last one up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And my question to Assistant Manager Groombridge is there were a couple of elevated of non-ferrous metals. I think copper and chromium. Does the public have any concerns about these elevated levels, or should they have?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, again, all of the metals concentrations that were found in both the municipal stormwater discharge, as well as what was coming out of the oil grit separator from the GM property, are what's considered typical of an urban area. Ideally, in new developments, there are stormwater management controls put in place these days. Unfortunately, with old infrastructure, it's just not the case, and it's very difficult to retrofit to old infrastructure. So from an environmental perspective, we would love to see improvements of that. From a human health perspective, it's not so much of a concern as an aquatic concern. And the key indicator there is that 12 Mile Creek is not showing those impacts. It is the discharges to the creek. So like I said, ideally, it would be nice to have stormwater controls. It's simply a consequence of how development has occurred historically here and all over the province.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
All right, that's it for the questions. Thank you very much, Ms. Groombridge, for, again, your presentation, and your team has done an outstanding job. And what I would ask is maybe for Mr. Hall, my apologies, Mr. Hall, if you can send the contact information to Director Kitse, and then council could have the name of the individual who looks after the St. Catharines area, as you noted many times in your presentation. That'd be good to have that for questions that the public may have of the site that we're not able to answer, and our staff may not have the answer quickly. They could reach out to Mr. Hall as well. But the only question I would have, and this is just really information, because sometimes when information like this is shared, people question the validity of those who are looking at it. All the information that was collected and analyzed was done by people with the appropriate educational backgrounds that have been able to come to these conclusions, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so I just, for the public to understand that these are people who have got the training to review the numbers, because I myself don't have that. This information it would be considered foreign to me because I'm not a scientist. I don't understand the information as presented. So I do like and want to thank for the ease of which you've been able to explain some of these. And I'm sure in future meetings, we'll have more details from our own staff about it as well. So with that, I would like to, Councillor Cisco, do you have a motion? And then Councillor Porter, I'm assuming you're seconding it. Councillor Cisco, your motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a motion to receive and refer to our staff for a follow-up report. I know it was indicated earlier, but if they could speak to the issues that have been brought forward. I think we've gotten a very good explanation this afternoon in what is as close to layman's terms as I think this topic can be broken down into, but something that can also be presented to the community to make it more understandable for everybody. I will admit, my area is physics. That's what I teach, and this was very complicated from my perspective. So anything that our staff can do with the help of the Ministry of the Environment to put this in a format that is good for the public to be able to digest the information would be sincerely appreciated.
Okay, Councillor Porter, are you seconding us?
Yes, I'm seconding it. I have a bit of an amendment that I hope that Councillor Cisco will find friendly. Okay. I would also like to have this report from the Ministry of the Environment to be submitted to the NPCA and their scientists for comment as well, just for an additional review. And I would also like our staff to provide some comment on, how we can improve our stormwater. I think that what we're talking about here speaks to the need for us to take some further action and have some plans related to improving the stormwater from the city. And I think we need a long-term plan to improve the water quality coming from our urban stormwater systems and into the watershed in places like 12 Mile Creek. So I know that we're not going to fix that today, and it's been a long-standing problem, but I think it's really important, and I would like that to be a little bit of a focus of the staff report, so we could start moving from there. Thank you.
Okay, so it's amended, and Councillor Cisco, friendly?
It's friendly. Could I ask that the portion with respect to improving the stormwater system be a separate a separate report, just because as Councilor Porter kind of indicated, that could be a much larger plan, and I don't want to delay a report coming back specific to this property. So if she's fine with that being a separate report, then I'm fine with that amendment as it stands.
Councilor Porter?
Yes, I'm fine with that.
Okay, thank you. And then Councilor Garcia, just it's a referral, so only for clarification.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to make sure that the referral, that the staff report that's being presented or prepared will address, among other things, the implications of the report we saw today regarding the potential record of site condition when it's necessary, and the implications to potential cleanup, and also implications of the potential sale of the property.
Okay, so all right. In terms of, if you can email those questions, that'll form the report. Any other councillors who have questions that they'd like staff to address, can you just email them to Director Kitse? She'll be the one who will be charged with putting the report together. And if there's questions that she can't answer, then it'll be noted in the report, or if it's beyond the scope of the report, she'll note that as well. All right, so that's a referral, just really a show of hands. All in favor of the referral? Okay, that's carried. Thank you very much for that. Again, great presentation. And I think it is good news for the city of St. Catharines that we've got some information in there that we can work with. It's never good news when we have to deal with remediated or industrial land. We all know that when it comes to industrial properties, there are always going to be issues of contaminants. What this report does show, and I'll just end with this, is that councils and staff of previous iterations of council, probably going back to Councillor Kushner's first term of council, way back when, have obviously shown a concern about the land and waterways in which we have here in the city of St. Catharines. So I think it's important for the public to look at this information from that lens as well, that this is, while the generations of degradation of our waterways and of land have taken place, you can see by the analysis that over the past 20 plus years, efforts have been made to at least try to address previous damages to the waterways and to the lands that surround at least abandoned industrial areas previously in other parts of the city. So I think that's an important takeaway for the public to know, that this has been a focus of the Ministry of the Environment, of the city over numerous years, because if not, the numbers that were presented today, I think would be much higher. And if the remediation work that has taken place previously upstream hadn't taken place, we would be looking at even more difficult numbers than at least the good numbers that we were looking at today. So in that lens, I think we still have work to do. But I think it would behoove us not to at least acknowledge the work that is done previously to try and mitigate past wrongs when it came to environmental issues associated with industrial development. So I just want to again thank Ms. Groombridge and her team for being on. I want to thank Director Kitse and her team. They've been working on this for a long time, and before Director Kitse, Director Riddle and the Chief Building Inspector Burrows they were working on this previously. Previous CAOs and previous councils have been looking at this and trying to address the issue. So this isn't something that just materialized in a few short months. There is work that's being done continuously, and I think this council has an opportunity to get it to a next level where we can start seeing some development on the property, which is, I think this council has taken some significant steps with the CIP and the ELNA and converting the property into a multi-use. Those are significant steps that will allow this property to hopefully continue to move forward. But we do have a lot more work ahead of us, but this is a good news announcement here today. And so with that, I got to read a bylaw. We have a motion that the bylaw passed on the Council General be read a first time and considered and passed. A bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council at its special meeting held on December 22nd, 2020. One reading with respect to the confirming of the proceedings. This be signed and executed by the mayor and city clerk. I have a mover and a seconder. Councillor Sorrento, Councillor Phillips, all in favor. And that is carried. And now we have the holiday adjournment. So I'll have a motion to adjourn. Councillor Cisco with the fine looking sweater, and the number one Bills fan in Bills Mafia, Councillor Miller. I'll give you the
Sorry,
second.
Mr. Mayor, it's not him, it's me. I'm number
Oh,
one.
you are not a Bills fan.
Don't
I'm
even
big
try
time.
it, Counselor. Don't
I'm
even
gonna
try it.
post my-
I'll give
I am gonna
Counselor Miller
post my
first.
AFC
You are not
record.
second either.
Fine.
Let's have a vote before this gets out of control. All
Let's
in
go
favor for
outside. Let's
adjournment.
go.
All right. Take care, everybody. Merry Christmas.